We've all heard the saying that if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day, and if you teach a man how to fish, he eats for a lifetime. So in this video, I'm going to try to illustrate this concept of the difference between adding an additional strategy and just subtracting an existing one to be able to allow movement to happen, so you're working with your body, rather than trying to force movement to happen by creating excessive tension and working against your body. I think you're going to see what we mean here in a second. And we're going to be using a common exercise, the hinge or the deadlift, and a common problem, which is too much rounding in the low back at the bottom, as an example. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. When we're doing a deadlift or hinge, we start in an upright position, and as we go back, we move into a 90-degree position of flexion at the hip. As this happens, the joint needs to be able to move into internal rotation. So it's this slight swiveling up of the upper leg towards this crest of the pelvis in order for us to successfully capture that bottom position without too much of a compensation. Now there were two areas that need to open up here to allow this to happen, and that's the back side of the lower pelvis, as well as this front side of the pelvis. And if we can't do that, what often happens is that we substitute for this hip position by rounding the lumbar spine a little bit too much. And if we do this, this probably isn't a problem at most loads, but overall the movement's not going to be too smooth, and at heavier loads, if we overtax this area, this could result in a little bit of discomfort. So the question is, how do we get these different spaces that we're talking about to be able to open up and let go as we move into this movement pattern? When we're talking about this hinge, a lot of times the cue that's given is to shift back through the pelvis, which allows this back area here in this lower half of the pelvis to open up a little bit. But if we just open this and we don't actually allow the pelvis to swivel down in this position by opening up this front side of the pelvis, we're going to run into a situation where we're actually staying a little bit too far away from this hip flex position here, and then that's where we're going to get the rounding. And to alleviate that, we might try to add tension in the low back, which is just fighting tension in the front with tension in the back, instead of allowing this front side to open up a little bit to then acquire this position and trust our bodies to use the adequate amount of tension on the front and the back side. So we're going to go through this cue here, but what I want you to visualize is that this front of the pelvis, which usually would hold too much tension and not allow this kind of a motion, is actually going to let go so that pubic bone goes down and back between the legs. Now, as you do this, you're going to feel this lumbar spine coming into a little bit more of an arched position, but it's not going to be being done by active compression and engagement of this lower back, but instead it's naturally going to be that the pelvis gets into that position, and then your body is going to use the adequate amount of tension in that lower back based on the load that you've selected. All right, so imagine I'm doing a deadlift, and at the bottom position, I have this obvious rounding in the low back. That might look a little bit like this. So I'm going down, and as I get to the bottom, the hips stop moving and the spine starts moving. And so you'll see we have a very obvious curve in the low back here. And you might think that the way to solve this would be to tighten the muscles of the low back by creating an arch. Now, if I go back into this arched position, but I still have tension above the pubic bone, what's going to happen is I'm just going to feel a lot of stress on the low back because I'm using tension in the low back to fight against tension in this lower abdomen and inner thigh region. Now instead, if I think about letting go of tension in the front here and allowing that pubic bone to go down and back, what's going to happen is I'll get a natural position of extension in the low back so that the spine's a little bit more neutral, but now I'm not creating tension in the back to fight tension in the front, but instead I'm letting go of tension in the front and trusting that my body can respond appropriately to the load I've selected. And that's going to look a little bit more like this, allowing that pubic bone to come down and back between the legs by relaxing compression in the front of the pelvis. And as you'll see here, it's a little bit easier for me to drop down. We have a much more neutral or flat or slightly extended lumbar spine here, rather than one that's excessively rounded. And subjectively, the difference here is that I don't feel any stress in the low back, but instead, a very effortless acquisition of this final position at the bottom. And so I'm doing a nice easy breath as I come down, reaching that pubic bone down and back. I can actually feel that internal rotation at that upper leg, between the upper leg and the pelvis. And I'm exhaling to return, just standing back up. Again, not thinking too much about it, trusting the body to be able to make that movement without having to think too hard. Inhale down, reaching back with the pubic bone. Exhale to return. So here would be fighting tension with tension. And this would be letting go of tension in the front to just sink down to the bottom position. All right, so that does it for this video. Just to recap, when we're in this situation where we sense a movement compensation, let's first think, where can we release tension rather than just creating more tension to fight existing tension? If we can do this and learn to trust the body to respond appropriately to load and context, I think we're gonna find that we're moving a whole lot better and with a whole lot more confidence. So if you have questions, leave them down below in the comment. If you like this video, like it. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you'll know when I upload a new video. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.